Hi, my name is Erin Allen. During this presentation, I will discuss the evolution of historical guidelines in medical research. I will also further analyze the Tuskegee syphilis study for unethical perspectives in legal breaches. The following slides will highlight important regulations established regulating human subjects in medical research. So to begin, I went back to 1938 with the Food and Drug Act, which was established United States law requiring drug safety to be tested before marketing. This established a need for human trials to ensure that the drugs were safe before administered to the population. And a few years later, in 1947, further human trials were conducted. And following World War II, Americans opened criminal proceedings against 23 German physicians and administrators who were found guilty for war crimes and crimes against humanity as they conducted medical experiments on thousands of prisoners in concentration camps without informed consent from these individuals. As a result of these experiments, thousands of individuals died or were permanently disabled. This occurred in the Nuremberg trials, which further established the Nuremberg Code, which is an international code of ethics following the abuse of human subjects during World War II. This includes 10 elements to regulate human experiments, which is primarily focused on informed consent. And then a few years later, even more, the International Code of Medical Ethics of the World Medical Assembly created the Declaration of Geneva, which is an international code of professional ethics, which establishes the duties of a physician, such as a physician must always bear in mind the obligation of preserving human life, and the patient should be the physician's first consideration. They shall also act only in the patient's interest when providing medical care, which might have the effect of weakening the physical or mental condition of the patient. So the Declaration of Geneva regulates physicians' actions regarding medical care. And in 1962, the Kiever and Harris Amendment was an amendment placed on the 1938 Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, which is the first U.S. law requiring informed consent. This established and empowered the FDA to ban drug experiments in humans pending animal trials for safety. So then just 2 years later, the Helsinki Declaration was established as an international ethical guideline. It established regulations for clinical research based on animal and lab experiments, and research should be conducted and supervised only by qualified medical workers. It should be preceded by a careful assessment of both the risks and benefits to the patient as well. It requires human beings to be fully informed and must freely consent to the research, and the responsibility for the human subject always rests within the medically qualified person's hands and never the subject's. And if the results of the experiment do not comply with ethical guidelines, they should not be accepted for publication. Furthermore, special care was taken with the informed consent of minors and established within this Helsinki Declaration. And now in 1972, I will also further elaborate on this Tuskegee syphilis study, but in 1972, the Tuskegee syphilis study concluded, and it was a research project that was conducted by the United States Public Health Service, which involved 600 low-income African American males who had been infected with syphilis and were monitored and observed for 40 years. The U.S. government conducted this study on males with untreated syphilis from 1932 to 1972. This vulnerable population was told they were going to be receiving free medical examinations and treatments, but were not told about their disease as it was referred to as bad blood. Over the course of the 40 years, publicity regarding this study increased, which caused the National Research Act of 1974 to be established, which created the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects of Biomedical and Behavioral Research, identifying the basic ethical principles that underlie research involving human subjects. And as a response to the Tuskegee syphilis study and National Research Act, the Commission drafted the Belmont Report, which provided an ethical foundation for human subjects research. The Belmont Report provides basic ethical principles and guidelines that will allow researchers to resolve ethical problems that surround human subject research. The 3 principles that are summarized within this report include respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. Respect for persons requires human subjects be treated as autonomous agents, and those who are unable to act autonomously are entitled to greater protection under this report. It enforces the need for researchers to have informed consent, which requires a presentation of information, comprehension from the participant, and voluntary consent from the participant as well, and allows them to decide what will and will not happen to them throughout the study. Beneficence focuses on the requirement that research must display greater benefits than the risks or harms to the human subject, which requires researchers to have a systematic risk and benefits assessment prior to the study. Justice establishes that the benefits and risk must be equally distributed, and the selection of subjects should not be discriminated based on race, ethnicity, class, etc., and fair procedures and outcomes must be conducted during subject selection. So throughout the development of ethical guidelines and regulations regarding human subject and medical experiments, the Tuskegee syphilis study continued in the United States, with few actions attempting to halt this study due to the unethical behavior and breaches of regulation involved. So the United States government conducted a study through the United States Public Health Service on African American males with untreated syphilis, and the vulnerable population was deceived into thinking they were receiving treatments, yet the physicians were not administering syphilis treatments. The Public Health Service selected Macon County in Alabama due to its large syphilis population and nature of the residents. They were often illiterate and had minimal access to doctors and treatments. The studies focused on individuals who were specifically in latent or tertiary syphilis, and in 1930, when this began, there was no cure that existed to treat syphilis. Furthermore, in 1940, when penicillin became available and was shown to be an effective treatment for this horrific disease, physicians still continued to refrain from administering the treatment to the participants, as they were originally recruited to not actually treat the disease, but to observe the participants who were suffering from syphilis. The physicians claimed their goal was to obtain medical knowledge on how to treat syphilis, but they violated medical ethics by providing false information and sham treatments while participants were under the impression they were receiving free medical care. This is irresponsible behavior by the medical professionals and goes against our moral obligation to ensure patient safety. When the study was initially approved, it was under the impression that the participants would receive treatments of some sort before the study concluded. Patients' rights were clearly violated as they received a letter stating that this was their last resort for free treatment, but the physicians were actually recruited to not administer treatments, ultimately lying to each participant. Additionally, sham treatments were given by the physicians for patients to believe they were receiving treatments such as mercury rubs, injections, medications, and even spinal taps were administered and performed with no evident health benefit for the participants. And physicians even plan to do autopsies following death to discover the effects of untreated syphilis, which is unethical as we have a moral duty to perform acts that serve the greater good and benefits outweigh the risk. We also have a moral duty to inform the participants of what they are undergoing. Patients in the study were not informed of the true motives of this research study, nor were they given the opportunity to provide informed consent. Patients were not informed they even had syphilis, as it was described as bad blood, and they thought they were receiving free treatments, yet inadequate treatments were delivered. And views on racism were changing in 1954, which caused people to become skeptical about this study. But doctors wanted this study to continue, so they added hot meals and cash payments to their sham treatments to persuade this vulnerable population to stay within the study. The doctors were unethical in this action as they were bribing a poor community with the goal of benefiting science, not the human subjects, and keeping them from halting this experiment. The most unethical issue, I believe, was when a physician found out about this study and tried to persuade the Center for Disease Control to stop the study. But he was told this was crucial for future doctors on how to treat syphilis, yet there was no actual treatment being done. Everyone was misinformed and under the impression they were being treated for a disease, but the only effective treatment method that was known at the time was not being used. And this resulted in a class action suit in 1973. Although this study continued for 10 years, the timeline displayed significant regulations that came into practice to ensure human subjects were safe during experiments. For instance, in 1947, the Nuremberg trials were conducted, which established a Nuremberg Code, which included 10 elements to regulate human experiments. Voluntary consent of human subjects is absolutely essential, and subjects must have a legal capacity to give consent. Furthermore, the experiment must avoid unnecessary physical and mental suffering and injuries, and no experiment should be conducted if it was believed to result in death or disability. This code was established in Germany and was completely ignored in the United States during the Tuskegee syphilis study. Also, human subjects are at liberty to bring the experiment to an end, but when subjects were getting skeptical of the Tuskegee syphilis study's motives, the physicians began persuading the participants with hot meals, cash, and other elements appealing to their vulnerable population, forcing them to stay in the study. The Belmont Code was later established following the Tuskegee syphilis study, since it violated the three basic ethical principles: respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. Informed consent was not provided, which breached both this code and the Nuremberg Code, and patients were given false information, or physicians withheld significant information and treatment procedures. Physicians also exploited a vulnerable group and utilized their power to persuade subjects to continue with this study. The men and families were put at risk during this study. And following the Tuskegee syphilis study, significant advances and modifications occurred in medical research, highlighting the significance of informed consent and establishing the ethical responsibilities of physicians to protect human subjects. And I understand to provide the best medical care, we must conduct research to obtain evidence supporting or disputing a treatment. Therefore, human subjects are needed to perform clinical experiments, indicating a significant need for ethical guidelines to uphold professional moral behavior and human safety. This concludes my presentation. These are my references. Thank you.